either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And we are 100% kicking off our pre-game to Folktober with our first deep dive.
Hooray!
We're doing something a little bit more classic-ish.
At least, I feel like it's pretty classic for a certain group. For a certain audience.
Yeah, well, maybe. 2013, 2012 is... I don't know how classic that is.
For a Ghibli fan, this is a pretty classic one.
Yes, we decided to do a film based on the oldest surviving monogatari form of folktale, and the magnum opus of Isao Takahata, The Tale of Princess Kaguya. The Tale of the Princess Kaguya.
Thank you.
Yes. But yeah, we figured go back as far as we could in something that felt very, very classic, and honestly, I didn't know it was the oldest surviving monogatari until I started researching this.
And on top of that, this is one of those Ghibli films that often gets overlooked, but is a fantastic one to add to your collection. I feel like for a lot of us, it was not our first, but once it was discovered, instantly put on the shelf as a classic must-watch.
Oh, yeah. No, this is one where I don't know why I put off watching it. I think maybe it was just... Maybe the DVD case wasn't that appealing to me.
Okay, so I have some thoughts on this too, because I also did not get around to this movie until much later.
Mm-hmm.
And a huge part of it was because a ton of the Ghibli DVDs that I could get my hands on early in the days did not have advertisement for this movie. It was maybe barely shown as a see the whole collection, doo-doo-doo-doo.
Mm-hmm.
And there'd be a quick scene of it, and I'd be like, oh, I don't really get it. I'm not really into princess films, so
Well, and maybe because when this came out, this was kind of when, we both would have been in college, so watching movies as much wasn't the big thing, or even then watching the next Studio Ghibli, because at that point it was The Wind Rises and
yeah,
the more traditional Ghibli that we think of.
Yeah, definitely. This wasn't in most people's ballpark range, and I know for me, I wasn't spending a ton of money going to the theater. The DVD copy of this wasn't well circulated. It wasn't nearly as popular as a lot of the other ones that were coming out in the collector's editions by this point. There was the first wave of the Blu-ray editions and copies that Disney was sending out, and they were finally taking the Disney logo off stuff, so people were like, oh yeah, look, I know all about this studio, you should check it out. But not this film, not until much later.
Yeah, and maybe because when I did, the DVDs that I did have at the time, My Neighbor the Yamadas was the closest, because, again, this hadn't come out by that point.
Exactly.
But The Tale of the Princess, or The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, is written by Isao Takahata and Riko Sakaguchi. It's directed by Isao Takahata, and The Tale of the Princess Kaguya tells the tale of Kaguya, if you haven't guessed it, a princess born from a bamboo shoot to peasants who seek to create the best life for her in the capital.
Yeah, and I liked this one is an interesting Ghibli take, because a lot of times Ghibli does take, much like Disney, classic tales and rewrites them in some way. I thought Takahata's version of this was one of the more compelling stories that Ghibli has produced in a while, because this was a tale that he had grown up with and was not convinced or fell in love with, but he thought could do better.
Yes.
And I think he did improve upon it.
Well, and if you do look at his style within Ghibli itself, he's also known from our last mic review, as you know, Pompoko, but also Grave of the Fireflies, Only Yesterday, and My Neighbor the Yamadas, which are all very, My Neighbor the Yamadas, I'll say lesser of the three, of the other, or
it's
of
definitely
the
not one of the big ones.
No, but his stories are very grounded compared to Miyazaki's. They're less fantastical. They're more just about the drama and expanding upon who you are and learning who you are, or dying miserably during the remnants of World War II.
Yeah, his ability to make you connect with the characters is, I think, above and beyond what other producers at Ghibli managed to achieve. Don't get me wrong, all of the stories are usually top tier, but I think his ability to write a character who honestly does not have a ton of dialogue or lines and still produce such a tear-jerking storytelling style is something truly incredible.
Oh yeah. That's just overall, like, how great his storytelling is. And like you said, he does expand upon it, and I'll get into that just a little bit, because the tale of the Princess Kaguya, or the original story, The Bamboo Cutter, or The Bamboo Cutter's Daughter, I have it written here somewhere.
I think it's just The Bamboo Cutter.
Yeah, The Bamboo Cutter. It's by today's standards, it's a very short story, as is a lot of Japanese folklore stories.
Sure, and it's also a very well-known story. Like, even it manages to squeeze its way even where people don't necessarily recognize that's where the story comes from. I mean, the first place I had run into it wasn't even this movie. It was actually Okami the video game. There's a background side character who has a beautiful daughter, and he's the bamboo cutter.
Okay.
And, like, it's not even, like, fully explained upon. I just originally thought it was from that. And then I kept running into it in stories and movies, and then, of course, this movie is all about it.
I know part of one Sailor Moon arc or movies based off of it, too.
Yeah, it shows up frequently enough to be a cornerstone tale.
Yeah. Okami's on my list to play at some point, too, because it, much like this game, or this movie, that game's art style is very different. I think that turned a lot of people off from playing it.
Which is disappointing, because I do, in fact, own that game on 3 different consoles, because I love it so much.
I've played the PS2, but I think it'd work better with the Wii.
It does work better with the Wii. The Switch version is honestly my favorite, because you can draw directly on the pad with your finger.
Ooh.
Saves a lot of frustration.
Okay. But as for Sakaguchi, other better-known works are Mary and the Witch's Flower, as well as one of the movies that kind of blew up on the internet in the little corner of the weeb community that I'm still attached to is, I still haven't watched them, but the 2 movies, To Every You I've Loved Before, as well as its counter, To Me, The One Who Loved You.
Cute names, love it.
They're a pair of, have you heard of them?
I have only briefly run into them.
Okay, they're a pair of movies that, depending on which order you watch them, it changes the meaning between the 2.
Oh, very fun.
Yeah, very much so. But it stars Aki Asakura as Kaguya Hime. Asakura, the only thing that I can find her in the US that people might know is she's listed in 2017's Full Metal Alchemist live-action adaptation, but it's like such a minor role that...
Yeah, not really for an American audience.
Nope. As well as starring Takeo Chi as the bamboo cutter.
Yes, and this was his final role.
Yes, but he has been in a lot of other movies.
Yes, he has.
Including 1968's Rebellion Samurai film Kill, Stray Cat Rock, Beat 71, as well as my introduction to Pinka Iga films, Angel Gets Nami.
Oh, okay, well, there you go.
Yeah. As well, it also stars Nobuko Miyamoto as the bamboo cutter's wife. The only thing that I could find that people would know her from in the West probably are the movie. She was in a movie that inspired Resident Evil called Sweet Home.
Dope. As
well as the ramen western Tampopo.
That I do know.
Yes. As well, Kengo Kora as Sutamaru, who appeared in Godzilla -1.
Of course, like everyone.
As well as another animated film, Miss Hokusai and Shoplifters.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And before we really get into anything in this movie, I do want to go over our sources for anyone who's missed our micro review. Our main source, well, we have a plethora of sources for this.
We do have a plethora.
For this series in general. But specifically, The Book of Yokai by Michael Dillon Foster, Japandemonium Illustrated, The Yokai Encyclopedia by Toriyama Sekian, translated and annotated by Hiroku Yoda and Matt Alt, Interview Series, Hiding in Plain Sight, A Brief History of Yokai, The Yanagita Kunio Guide to Japanese Folktale, translated and edited by Fanny Hagen Mayer, Ancient Times in Modern Japan, an anthology of Japanese folktales, selected and translated by Fanny Hagen Mayer, Japanese Tales, edited and translated by Royal Taylor, and yokai.com for just our general knowledge in case we couldn't find anything. And beyond that, for this episode specifically, the documentary Isao Takahata and His Tale of Princess Kaguya. One that I might add starts with Takahata trying to take a nap at the start of the documentary.
I cannot blame him. He had a lot to do.
And he was quite old at the time, too.
He was. This was his last film to direct. He unfortunately did pass away in 2018. And so a lot of people do see this movie as like his crowning achievement. And the documentary, for those interested, is incredibly good. It is a full feature length that talks about his thought process, how he directed in general, and also just kind of really gets you into touch with who this sort of guy was.
It's a very Japanese making of, too, I will say that, because what I found is the American making ofs are very energetic and excited, whereas the Japanese style is very documentary, where it's like,
yeah.
And now Takahata is going to the studio to draw or to explain stuff. It's like, okay.
Yes, it's a lot more clinical, but especially for him and his style, I think it works really well. It definitely shows off his thought process and also the art stylings that were involved in this. It really helps you see the small details throughout the whole movie that really help bring it to life.
Mm-hmm. But what's important is this is his first film in 14 years. After the less than well-received My Neighbor the Yamadas, which wasn't cell animated, which at the time and still is, for the most part, I guess. We'll see how the future goes, but the core of Studio Ghibli, and that's what Studio Ghibli was built on.
True.
But as well, this, and we see it a bit in the Yamadas, but not as much as in Kaguya, that Takahata felt that the backgrounds were getting too detailed, specifically in his way earlier film, Only Yesterday.
I can understand that.
Yeah,
some beautiful work, but...
Yeah, but if you go back and watch, I agree, you do start to see that the background and the cell animated characters don't mesh that well together at times, where it's clear two heavily different art styles.
Sure, I can definitely understand that.
And an aspect that you'll see differently is, with The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, is the somewhat minimalistic backgrounds that the style also matches with, because it's the same art style.
True.
And because it wasn't cell animated, specifically My Neighbor the Yamadas, the staff had to learn a new skills, and it kind of screwed up their whole system, and they said it broke Studio Ghibli for a bit.
Which is interesting, because I think we've seen the same thing happen more recently with some of the brand newest versions that have come out, the brand new films that have come out.
Specifically Goro Miyazaki's fully 3D animated Earwig and the Witch.
Exactly, which had similar critiques and reviews, and yet, much like Tale of Princess Kaguya, didn't do great at first, but people have slowly developed a big feeling for it.
I'm waiting for part 2, because the ending of that one just is so horrid.
For me, I agree. I didn't love it. However, I found a lot of people online who were very into how it ended. They liked that it ends with no magic. Kind of like how a lot of people are very into Princess Kaguya and how sad it ends, but they love it.
Mm-hmm. In between the failure of My Neighbor the Yamadas, Takahata was bugged by producer Yoshiaki Nishimura to make another film.
Mm-hmm. He's a big fan.
Major fan. And this is one of the guys who left Studio Ghibli to create another studio.
Of course, yeah.
But continuing in the tradition of My Neighbor the Yamadas, they didn't want to do cell animation. And because of this, they had to set up a new Ghibli studio with 80 freelancers to hand draw almost everything, or at least the keyframes.
Yeah.
But personally, I am glad we did choose this one, because The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, being the oldest folktale, it was written sometime between the end of the 9th and the start of the 12th century, which this is the Heian period. This is really, really old.
Yeah, yes, this is incredibly old.
But that being said, with it being that old, and as we've talked about, there's a lot of other influences, it's not the first film adaptation.
Oh, no.
The first film adaptation, that goes to the mostly lost, unfortunately, 1935, Princess Kaguya, directed by creator of Godzilla, Eiji Tsuburaya.
Very cool.
As well, there is a 1987 live-action adaptation directed by Kon Ichikawa, who is, I learned, the associate director on The Adventures of Milo and Otis, which I did not know was a Japanese movie.
I did not know either, but now that I know that, I can see it. It does make sense now that I know that.
I think someone else I talked to says, that makes sense.
It does make sense. It is definitely filmed in the style that I see frequently. Yeah. But if I had not been told, I would have just assumed a little bit more artsy than normal.
Well, it's like the RKO productions of our Christmas specials, where it's like, oh, of course that makes sense.
Yeah, no, very much same style.
Mm-hmm. And while The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, or The Bamboo Cutter, is the oldest, it's not the only story about strange children.
No, that's kind of a worldwide phenomenon.
And on top of that, the way they're born, there's, in the Yanagita Kunio Guide to Japanese Folktales, the first section is called Propitious Births?
Sure.
Something.
Weird births.
I mean, it's a small section, but notably, one of them is Momotaro, about a boy who is born from a peach and eventually rescues a princess. There's a kind of genie male version of the Bamboo Cutter called Takanoko Doji, which is about a man who finds a 1,230-year-old 5-inch man who grants him 7 wishes.
Wow, that's very specific. I love it.
As well, so the Yanagita Kunio Guide to Japanese Folklore, or Yanagita Kuni Guide to Japanese Folklore, it's very academic, and even then in some of the notes it's noted that, hey, one of these derivative stories is similar to Takehime or Bamboo Shoot Princess.
I mean, sure, and to be honest, worldwide, this sort of idea of, like, children that are weird coming from somewhere strange and mythical, like Bamboo or Peaches.
Or the Green Children.
Yeah, it's nothing new. It's a worldwide phenomenon. But something that I do find interesting is, most of the time, the children that are sprouted forth from nature are usually seen as good signs or gifts from gods, as opposed to a lot of other versions, where they are seen as, like, stolen fairies and here for mischief and harm. Yeah,
no, exactly. And we see a blending of lore and religion and stuff too, because also, as we noted when we brought up in our Pompoko episode, there's the blending of Buddhism with Japanese folk tales, and there's specifically the story of Mamesuke, or Bean Boy, who was born from the swelling of a childless couple's wife's thumb after praying to Kanon, who is a prominent Bodhisattva in Japanese Buddhism.
That is strikingly similar to Thumbelina.
Yeah.
Like, almost the same, minus Buddha.
Yeah. Well, that's also something interesting, too, because in the Yanagita Kuni Guide to Japanese Folklore, he even notes on a couple of the stories, this is very similar to Red Riding Hood or the Brothers Grimm, where it's like, maybe there was some influence by the time you got writing this stuff down, kind of like in one of the Scandinavian folklore books I have, the prefaces states that, hey, we had some issue, like, almost nothing has been tainted, or almost everything has been tainted by Christianity in this. So the original forms of these stories are completely lost at this point.
True, and at the same time, the idea of, like, taking inspiration from the world around you and incorporating it with mythology is something that just humans do in general. So having these, honestly, potentially separate but coherent and similar timeline and development stories makes, honestly, a lot of sense. Like, people were around vegetables and gardens, and having children was a big deal. Why not have all of these stories about children who are sprouting from vegetables and thumbs? It's not that far of a leap.
Or prosperity from taking care of nature or doing the right thing.
Sure. I mean, most of these tales have some form of moral that goes with them. Granted, a lot of the European tales, especially post-Christianity, the moral is scare you into doing the right thing, scared straight. Or, in a lot of these tales, it's more of, see what good comes from if you are the best you can be. Yeah. Which is a slightly different version, because at the end, even if you do your best, you might not get what you wanted.
Yes and no. Some of them are, but there's a lot that aren't necessary. They have, like, maybe a little cautionary bit to them, but it's not 100% cautionary.
Exactly. It's not cautionary, because it's a different style of storytelling. You are still getting a moral out of it, but it is not the scary, like, I will chop off your foot to become a princess of the European tales.
Yeah.
There's still moral. There's still the idea of, like, see how these people were the best they could be. You should emulate.
Yeah, the woman who took care of the broken sparrow with the broken back, and then the lady who broke a sparrow's back to try and get the prosperity she got.
Exactly.
Kaguya did take many years to make. The storyboards actually started in 2009, and production was delayed because the storyboards were not finished. And in that time, Miyazaki had retired with The Wind Rises, quote-unquote retired.
Yeah, we all remember this very detailedly. He announced very big and publicly, the end of Ghibli was announced in the US, and we were all like, no, oh my god! And then he immediately turned back around and was like, JK, I've thought up a new movie.
That's partially because Goro Miyazaki released his second film from Up on Poppy Hill, as well as Hiromasa Yonebayashi had his directorial debut with Arrietty, and I think shortly left after that too, so...
Yeah, it was a very confusing time, because again, like we talked with Pompoko, a lot of people didn't realize the difference between Ghibli and Miyazaki. A lot of people thought everything was by him. And so when he announced retirement, a lot of people assumed that this was the end. There was not going to be any more Ghibli films, not realizing that all these other directors worked for them, that there was room for more directors to come in, and that there was a constant changing, like, roster that could possibly give us more.
Exactly. So one thing I do also want to note, the voices were recorded prior to animation, which I think is always the better way to do it, but...
I agree with a few rare exceptions.
But before we get into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
You have found a wonderful princess-themed sake.
The Paper Crane by Origami, that is a local Arkansas sake. Not sponsored, but...
Very fancy, very fitting.
Cheers.
Cheers. That is lovely.
Ooh, that is very good.
Top tier.
But The Tale of Princess Kaguya. I like that the title card is pretty but simple.
It is. The whole movie is pretty but simple, so it fits.
Yes and no. There are some parts I feel are more complicated, but the story itself is not simple.
No, the story itself is not. Visually, though, this movie, while having some very wonderful detailed parts, compared to most Ghibli films, delightfully simple.
Yes, I will concede to that. But we start off with a bamboo forest and finding Kaguya, which I like the start of, and how a lot of this movie feels, especially in the early half, where it's hazy and dreamlike when we're introduced to everyone. It's rough and a little beautiful at times.
It is, and I think that really helps add to the longing and the fantasy that Kaguya, or as her parents call her, princess, throughout the whole film. Like, that helps solidify this, like, perfection and idealistic childhood world that she strives to find.
Mm-hmm. No, or a childlike world that she doesn't know anything different from at this point.
At this point, yes.
And it also helps it feel magical and classical at that same time with the fogginess and like...
It does. It's very storybook, fairy tale.
Yes.
It's very good.
There's another movie we're covering for our next deep dive that has a very similar style to it at points.
True.
But also, it might be because the art style is based off sumie, which is a traditional brush painting style. And one thing I also found interesting is that Takahata can't draw and gives direction through expressive words and movements, which is interesting for someone who is like the director of an animated movie. You'd think that they'd be at least able to like draw some basic sketches.
Especially, okay, I could understand it if like this was a director's first animated film. He's like, well, I can't draw, but I really have this idea. Mm-hmm. No, this is not his first rodeo. In fact, this is his last rodeo. So, like, him not being able, like, to profusely being like, I do not draw, I just try and explain it, and my wonderful team does it for me, is very fascinating. And also, I think, adds a lot, because there is much more, like, detailed artistry in where he says, like, her eyes shine, and they put effort into that. Or they notice, like, oh, the baby's big smile. Like, that is a detail that when you're speaking, when you're telling a story, adds wonderful detail, but when you're drawing, it's not something you necessarily would think about.
Well, the simplicity also allows to be more expressive at times.
I agree.
And more specifically in like the movements of characters. And it keeps it simple and subtle. It gives it a bit of a more delicate feel compared to other movies within this
It's a
genre.
very visually light feeling movie, yes.
Exactly. Which he he returns home, and I like how they establish the dynamics of all these characters really early on.
They do.
Where the husband is so protective and the woman is so motherly.
She's so excited to be a mom. He's so excited to be the best dad, the best husband that he could possibly be. It really sets them up so that way later on when their characters are exaggerated more by time and money, they still feel like they are the same person.
Exactly. And just the way they set up the baby herself being magical, like, just because she starts off as very much so in princess attire or shrine maiden-esque attire.
Yeah, teeny tiny little Thumbelina-sized person.
But magically transforms into a baby to the point where the husband's asking, do you think she's a Mononoke or also a spirit? It's an older term for a spirit that got further. It became what yokai are, basically.
Sure, and I think it works very well, even though the translation, because this movie, for thus watching in English, there's not really, like, a clear divide between translation. They do a very nice job of trying to seamlessly incorporate words and versions of the names and words as best they can, despite this honestly being a bit tricky, since names are a huge and symbolic portion of this story. But I think it still works because even though we might not have a direct version of whatever they've decided to call her, we do understand the idea of fairies, and we do have the understanding of, like, the spirits, and they regularly, like, even as she's growing, they constantly refer to her as coming from the heavens, coming from above. And even if we don't quite comprehend the difference in that theologically, we still have some concept of like, oh, they see her as their daughter, but they also understand that she is not a person. She is something else. She's from the gods.
Yeah. I mean, hell, she makes a woman magically produce milk.
This is true, and also grows so fast that the children in town are like, oh my god, what's wrong with this kid?
Yep, because that's where we get a little bit of the cycle of the seasons, because now it's spring, and she's growing rapidly, much like a plant, springing up like a plant, as the old saying says.
Yep.
But she also has this bit where she starts mimicking nature with the frogs initially, and then the little kids calling her Little Bamboo, which... This is
very cute.
But this is also where we get... It's very simple, but it's the start of pulling her between the village and her father's desire and wishes. So kind of like that, I guess, feminist undertone of this whole movie where she's moving by a man's desire, but she can't escape society, basically. But the way we see this, and why I think it's so subtle, and it's not that the father's trying to be controlling.
No.
The father's trying to do what's best for her, but we see it initially with the kids encouraging her by calling her Little Bamboo, and the doting father calling her Princess.
Sure.
Which, honestly, I to a point I get it, I've always thought calling a pet name of calling someone by royalty is always the weirdest thing.
I agree, but so the way that I have always watched this movie, especially because there is a full naming ceremony later on, is much like we have names that mean something else, like Alexander or, James. They have a meaning outside of just the name James, right? I've always understood it that the name Princess is the meaning of the name, and they just decided to say Princess because it understands and translates best for the movie, as opposed to having you need to, look up what the name Sarah means.
Yeah.
So, even though, yes, it's a little corny that he calls her Princess, I kind of find it sweet and endearing because this is an older couple who definitely clearly were never having kids. This is their miracle from God baby. Of course you're naming her Princess or Angel or, my perfect child. And I agree. I do think it sets up the interesting themes of fundamentalism and the restrictions that women had, especially historically, but still face often today. But in a way that I think a lot of other strong feminist movies fail at, where her father truly loves her and really truly wants what's best for her, even if it's not necessarily what him and his wife want or is best for. He will bend heaven and earth for this child. And I think setting up from the beginning, showing the dotingness, his concern when she falls off the deck, trying to catch the frog, how just panicked he is.
Oh, yeah.
And then she's fine, because she's a toddler.
Well, she's also a god, but...
And also a god.
It's kind of god, I don't know.
I think we can say god. She goes to the moon, which my understanding is that's where gods live.
You go to the moon in Final Fantasy V and you're not a god.
Yeah, that's a very different genre. There's a lot of symbolism in Final Fantasy, and not a lot of it translates over.
Maybe one day we'll do a Final Fantasy movie, but
we definitely will.
But the name is also important too. I think that's interesting that you brought that up. Actually giving her a name, because in the preface or foreword of Japanese Tales, edited and translated by Royal Tyler, it's brought up that in those tales, most of them are from the Sengoku era or early Edo era. Almost none of the women have names in them. They're always daughter of this important person.
And I also think that the hint, especially for an English-speaking audience, is in the name of the movie itself. The tale of the Princess Kaguya is written like Princess Kaguya is a title as opposed to a name.
Yes.
So I have always assumed when I watched this movie that both Little Bamboo is like a variation on, Sam or Sarah or Samantha, where it has a bigger meaning, probably Latin or Greek or Hebrew.
Well, because I don't think we ever actually, she never says what her name is and we never learn it, but
no,
it's that whole, I don't know how much, I haven't done a lot of research onto Eastern Asian law or magic systems, but at least in the West, you have your regular name that everyone calls you, you have your magic name, and then you have the secret name that you don't tell anyone.
Are you saying the lore of Cats the musical, where you have
yes,
three names?
I'm not gonna. Yes, that is the only part of Cats I actually like, because like it's like, okay, this is very esoteric and all this shit. And I like the start of the Cats and the whole sacrifice of like, oh, we're gonna sacrifice one of us to like ascend to a higher being. It's so laced in magical thought that it starts off really cool, and then it gets bogged down with dancing fucking cockroaches and furry tit shaking.
There are no cockroaches except for the live action one, which is the worst version.
That's the only one I know. That's the only frame of reference I have for Cats.
That is the worst one. I will eventually hand you the book of poems that it is based off of. And I think a lot of your questions will be answered, but not in the way that you want, because the book of poems was meant for children. And they are just loose poems based on cats that this man saw around his town.
But no sacrifices?
No.
No need to go back and read Make Me Go Back, Mom, or Don't Make Me Go Back, Mommy?
None of the cats are connected. They are just a book of poems. And he walked around town and went, wow, look at that fat orange cat over there. That one's name is Fluffy McPants Face, and it's the leader of the trains. Like, that's literally all the original was.
Catty McCatface.
Catty McCatface, yeah. No, I agree. I think there is some symbolism in her never giving her moon name. I think it's also played nicely, and I think this is where Takahata really, when you, especially when you listen to him talk about his original experience with this tale and how disconnected he originally felt from it growing up, and how he never really felt like he understood Kaguya's position. He never really felt like he understood why this tale was as powerful as other people were talking about it. Having this idea of her just taking the identity that is given to her, and part of it is out of love, right? Like, she is her dad's princess because she loves her father, so she will go by that name because that's what they call her. She goes by Little Bamboo because she loves the kids in this town, so when they call her Little Bamboo, she's like, yep, no problem. When she becomes Princess Kaguya, even though she doesn't like it, she takes on being Princess Kaguya because she loves her parents. And so I totally can see all of this working in not just like the basic storytelling, but also in the idea of how well it is written, where she talks about not remembering much on the moon. It takes a lot for her to eventually remember that she is even an actual celestial being, despite her parents telling her this for most of her life.
Well, and the way the parents explain it to her, it feels like...
Like maybe she didn't take them seriously?
Or no, it's just like the way some parents dote on their kids is like...
Oh, sure. There's some very extra parents out there.
And it is interesting because, I mean, for most of, I think a lot of the West or knowledge of Japanese history, we have this assumption that, oh, it's been male-dominated for so long. Well, Japan had multiple empresses in like the 500s and stuff,
sure.
And I couldn't tell you anything about it. I just know they exist, and one of them brought in the Nara era.
Yes,
and that's my extent of that. That's where I'll leave it. I'm learning shit.
I think
but
you should,
cool.
because there's current rumors that potentially, I know it's a big potential, but I follow the drama because I love a royalty drama. Potentially, we might get another empress.
I forget you're one of those people.
I am only one of those people because I have nothing better to do with my day. That's just what's on my YouTube feed at any given moment.
Spooky video game music.
I also have spooky video game music. I think people underestimate the amount of content I consume in a day. And eventually, the royalty of the world does make it to my desktop.
Great.
Along with the history of the royalty of the world. And then,
the
other
inbreeding. That's why I find the name calling someone a princess or my queen or my king weird.
Granted,
because they were cousins usually.
Usually, I do think that Japan had a few workarounds. They're less inbred than us Europeans. Less. It's hard to beat us. We're the queens and kings of inbreeding, unfortunately.
Don't you just mean the UK? Or sorry. I forget. There's the Habsburgs.
Yes, thank you. They are the true epitome. But yeah, I think the way that Takahata added small details in, like not knowing her name, them calling her princess, and her never truly acknowledging that yes, she's a moon child,
or calling her Little Bamboo, by the way,
she just is fluid to go with whatever anyone calls her. But the love that she shows for her parents clearly dominates all.
Mm-hmm. Regardless of what's happening.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, hell, Daddy's taking her to work. And it shows that she's a friend of nature very early on, where she tries...
She's literally a princess.
Well, no, not like she...
Disney princess calling wild boar piglets to her.
But it's not a Disney princess. She has this draw to nature, and
She
nature's
does.
kind of drawn to her, even though nature doesn't always reciprocate that, because obviously she looks like a person, so the pig's going to attack her.
Sure.
And
But she clearly has an affiliation to it. She has a love of all things alive.
Yeah, but she doesn't... She also is oblivious to... This shows, like, her very naivety, because, yeah, we've already said she's from the moon, but her understanding of the Earth itself and not realizing, hey, there's danger here.
That's true. She has... And part of the writing is smart, where she grows so fast that she, has some catching up to do. Some lessons that I think would be taught and learned over the course of a full year, she doesn't get to learn because she's growing so fast.
Well, in this scene, when Satomaru rescues her, she goes from being a toddler to being old enough to speak, which, is still a toddler, but
still a toddler.
Actually speak better comprehensively than a toddler.
She's skipping like a full year, honestly. She goes from like 1 to 3 very quickly.
I'll say probably like 4 or 5. The way she talks and sings, she knows a bit more.
Maybe.
This is also why I love where the movie is very... It's more detailed at times, and then there's other, like, very simple times where... But those are... It's simplified only when, like, they're living in the moment. When, like, she's hanging out with the kids, going through the forest.
True.
Some random baby dangling from the back of one of the other kids.
Yeah, I love the idea of, like, this group of kids babysitting, because this child is butt naked, flopping in the wind with its siblings who are just sprinting through the woods, doing God knows what, for funsies.
Yeah.
And Mom's like, you can go out, but only if you take your sibling with you. Oh, Mom.
It's like that Boney M meme where it's like, yeah, we're going to start a band, but you have to let your brother in.
Yeah, no, it's exactly like that. But I also think that it adds to this idea of, like, this bonding of a group of children, because they are truly unsupervised. So there is more time for these kids to create their own group, to really bond and connect with each other. And even though they know she's weird and they tell her this to her face, they don't necessarily distance themselves from her like I think a lot of European stories would have. She's still part of the gang. She's just the weird kid in the gang.
But I think it's because Sutamaru is obviously the oldest. Like, he's probably like 11 or 12, leading a band of 8 and 9-year-olds.
I mean, when you live in a small town, you get what friends you got, so yeah.
No, exactly. But also her being, and this is why I say she's more than 3 years old, is because the way she speaks and how far they advance, like, her knowledge, they also show that she's mysterious to everyone, even the kids around her, because she knows this song that no one else has heard, and there's a haunting line in it that sets up kind of the sadness that's to come, is, if I hear you pine for me, I will return to you.
That's true. I think the way that I always interpreted this song was it is one of those songs that, like, everyone knows, but nobody knows there's a second verse to it. And I mean, we run into this quite a lot, especially if you're into, like, old-timey rhymes or hymns. God, so many extra lines with hymns that you didn't know until you're asked to sing verse 1 and 12.
Yeah, my favorite one is, the customer is always right. In taste alone. Yeah,
there's a lot of, like, sayings are very popular like that. Like, jack of all trades is better than master of none. Sort of, like, there's extra to it that she knows. And I do think that while physically they do a nice job of pacing it, where, like, she definitely visually grows, but she doesn't do Pompoko style animation where she's, like, popping and growing. It's not bubbly.
No.
It is a slow, constant rate.
Yeah, or like Ponyo's growing.
Yes, where it's a little less obvious.
Exactly. And the thing is, like, she matures with the seasons, because right now I believe we're at summer at this, or no, we're still in spring, pigs having kids, but we're very close to the changing of summer, because there's one point where there's a little bit of cicadas.
Yeah.
But while she's missing, the father is searching, and he finds another glowing bamboo that drops gold for them, which...
So much gold.
Very much so. The gods providing and caring for the princess, / kind of... Here's the thing that I find is that this is the part where the father has wants for the daughter.
Of course, as every dad does.
But this is where the gods are pushing that idea, or they're pushing their own idea of where they want Kaguya to go.
I agree to an extent. I think this is one of the parts of the movie where having the reflection and the way that Takahata directed the interpretation of this, the father already has in his mind that this little girl is a princess, and that he would dote on her and give her the world if he could. There's never any direct direction, though, from the gods what the money is to be used for, other than just for probably the princess's happiness, right? The girl's happiness.
Yes.
They don't specifically say, go create her into an actual princess.
I disagree with that.
And I think in the film, it is pretty unclear.
They give her those fancy robes, though.
He buys her fancy.
No. There's later on when he cuts another bamboo and robes come out. So
that's true, but it is also one of those things where clearly the gods are so out of touch with Earth that it is fairly easy to interpret it as, hey, thanks for watching our kid. Here's some goods.
Mm-hmm.
Get yourself, how much is eggs these days? $25? Like,
yeah. Well, you also got to think of kind of from the standpoint, too, is if these are like, say, Buddhist gods or whatnot.
Sure.
Because we never get any clear distinction other than
some visualization at the end.
Yeah, the visualization at the end, there's like ones that look like Bodhisattvas and stuff.
Yeah, some stylized, yeah.
But the thing with that, though, is if you look at it from a god's perspective, the people that are donating a lot to them are rich people.
True.
So they assume that, hey, the gold that we're getting, these fancy clothes that are being gifted to us.
Sure.
That's not from the common folk. So they have, like you said, like they like, how much are eggs today? $25.
Yeah.
They have no concept of what it means to live as common folk.
No, they're so disconnected they don't even know what true emotions on Earth look like. So, like, while I do not disagree that, like, the father takes this and interprets this as, oh, the gods want us to turn her into a true princess. What are we doing here? We need to hurry. Because, of course, that would be your reaction if the gods literally handed you gold and nice outfits for your child. But I have always interpreted it as the gods are just so out of touch. They're like, hey, thanks for taking care of my weird stepchild. Pew pew, how much are... Here's some clothes for her.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's a weird relation that perpetuates that, again, feminist idea that men are in control and don't know what's best for women.
I agree, and I also think that it adds a layer of realism about this father where he wants what's best for his daughter to the extent of giving up his entire way of life for her.
Yeah.
Because when they go to the palace, he's not even taking the name of royalty. He's just giving her the name of royalty.
Well, I mean, think about it. At this time, the people who are in power who live the life of luxury is royalty.
Exactly.
So that's how people want to be treated and pampered or they think people want to be treated and pampered.
Sure. Oh, yeah, no. I mean, granted, I'm sure for him who sees as an adult man who has worked all his life, I'm sure to him the idea of taking his daughter away from the woods, where even later on, some of the characters, when she reunites with them, they talk about, what if we were hungry often? Did you really miss being hungry? She's like, yes, I missed it. I'm sure to her dad, that is not what he wants for his daughter. He's like, no, if I can feed you expensive fatty tuna all day long, we are eating that.
You'll eat so much rice, you'll get beriberi disease to the point the government has to make you say, hey, eat some buckwheat soba, guys.
Yeah, of course this father is going to dote, and he has always seen her as a princess. Because while this is his daughter, he has not forgotten that she is a fairy god from the moon.
No, exactly. The gift child.
The gift child. I think this is the clear divide between the mom and the father, too, in the storytelling.
I'm sorry, in my mind, because I've been watching some action anime shit, I'm back, unfortunately, into fucking One Piece.
Oh, look at you go. The grind.
Like episode 350 something, fucking hell. No, I just thought of don't punch a gift horse in the face.
Yeah.
And then I thought don't punch a gift baby in the face, and then I pictured anime, just someone like
One Punch Man?
Not One Punch Man, but like that scene in anime where like they punch the face, and then like the face distorts and gets like the shockwaves. That's what I pictured, someone punching a baby. Don't
punch babies. Or horses, for that matter. Horses will take you out.
We're gonna have to talk about a movie about someone who punches a horse. Thank you, Riley.
That's true.
Sorry, it's a camel. It's not a horse. But
those
close.
are different. I don't know if a camel will take you out. Probably. They're very big.
They're assholes. Camels are worse.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never punched a camel. I don't plan to.
Yeah.
But I also think this is where the movie does a nice job of beginning the divide of the mother and the father. Not necessarily divide and like putting them against each other, but in the differences in how they parent.
World perspectives.
Yes. The mother is there And she is doing her best to be the mom that she knows her daughter needs. She's there to be the person that can listen to her daughter, to comfort her, to be everything that she feels a mother should be.
Mm-hmm.
Where the father is very clearly like, if I can buy the moon for my child, I will be.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think that's the point of it all is, one, you have the side of the whims of the father and, by extension, the gods, which still puts the father in that position of power.
Yeah.
But then you have the very down-to-earth mother, which we'll get into a lot more later on once they actually move to the capital.
True.
But by the time fall ends up coming around, we see that Kaguya is very capable and matured. She's caring for others.
She's clearly, like, loving where she's living.
Yeah, we have the reveal that her desire is to live there forever, specifically with her playing with the kids, catching the pheasant. Hey, we're going to have stew tomorrow, which makes it feel like a special thing, which I was thinking about, like, in our own history in our world, where eating out used to be like the thing you did like once a month. I mean, that's how that's how I eat. But like for most people, I have friends who are like, "Oh, it's cheaper just to eat out." And I'm like, no.
I mean, it depends on how much and who you are.
Rice and eggs.
It depends on how much and who you are and how well you can cook rice and eggs.
Yeah. But, I mean, that's the point. It's just, like, it's the simple things that she's here for, that she's enjoying. Yes. Seeing the piglets almost getting killed by a pig.
Well, that, and I think...
Or boar.
I think the thing that she truly loves is the connection with the people that she's made friends and family with, right? Like, she truly does love her parents. She loves going out with this group of kids and hanging out with them. She's made friends with the rest of the townspeople. They know her now.
This is an anti-Sandlot movie.
I mean, a little bit, but it's growing up in just two different scenarios. One of which is a moon goddess whose parents were given a shit ton of money, and the other was a child whose parents said, "You're a little weird, maybe go outside."
Yeah. A bit, but I mean, but they live outside. There's not that much distinction between their hut and the outdoors.
No, I mean, when you're poor, yeah, there's not a lot of distinction between your hut and the outdoors.
But in general, too, like, I mean, if you look at, like... Go back and look at, like, more peasant Japanese architecture.
Sure.
And there's not a lot of divide between your world and the outside world. I mean,
European architecture for peasants was very similar. Livestock lived on the first floor with you.
No, exactly. I mean, it's you get that very... It's a level that we like to go back to. Like, it's kind of like going back to nature.
Sure. There's a comfort in reconnecting with the world.
Yeah. Tending to the land, growing crops, taking over your grandfather's farm.
Yeah, I mean, if you're really into Stardew Valley.
I was referencing Harvest Moon, but thank you for making it more modern.
No problem. Glad there's lots of dead grandpas.
There's a lot of dead grandpas in the world. There's more dead people than there are people alive.
That's true, but I specifically was referencing ones who gifted me farms for me to take care of in my long, dark days of my corporate job.
But you're working on a farm at least, so...
True.
Yeah. But tomorrow won't come because it's now off to the capital, which is... I like how they pace the seasoning.
I do too. It's very rushed.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it's rushed because it's very poetic in the way Kaguya arrives. She arrives in spring with the new growth of the bamboo.
True.
She matures a bit during the summer, and then by the fall, it's time for her to leave and... leave.
Yeah.
And it's the changing of the times. It's more so what I was getting at.
No. It's beautifully paced and symbolic. It's just fast as she has been on this earth for not even a year.
I don't think she's on the earth for like 2 years.
I don't think so. She is here for a very short amount of time.
Well, one of the stories is mentioned she's like 10 when she goes back.
Which I like. I understand that. I think the movie portrays her growth as being terribly quick, especially when she's confused later on by winter and like how dead the forest looks. So I think in the movie they've maybe sped things up just a little bit.
Again,
it's hard to say.
Again, a god's depiction of life.
True.
Where winter is the death era.
True, and also just like how long do humans live? If you're a god on the moon, you're not really sure. Could be a little tiny bit, could be a lot of bit. I don't know.
Very much like elves.
I mean, yeah, they're similar.
Yeah, what's that new one, the anime that's the elf who's, like, training up the new heroes?
Frieren?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One. Which, here's why I think... Okay, I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here. I think it's very interesting how people bitch at like, oh, the West, oh, you're weebs, you're pulling from this culture, but then you go to anime, and so many of them pull from Western culture.
Sure.
Like, hell, you look at almost all of Miyazaki's films.
That's
up
true.
Until, like, The Wind Rises. Porco Rosso's Italian. Fucking Castle in the Sky is very much European, or a little... I think Miyazaki's a little more Italian or Southern European influence with, like, his tiling of the roofs and whatnot. But then you also have, like, Kiki's Delivery Service.
Very European.
Or you go Attack on Titan, which is very much...
German. It's just German.
It's the Germans and the Jews.
It's just Germans, yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot of influence in, especially architecturally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's why I find specifically this genre of film fascinating, because there's that cross-cultural
for sure.
interactions that we don't really talk about too much.
No, I think it's easier in an animated world to have that time to spend developing based off of pick a city that you saw one time here, because you don't have to film there. You can just have your trip that you went, you did some research, you have your photos, good to go. You don't need to replan to reshoot anything.
No, exactly. I mean, you don't even have...
You don't technically have to even go. You can just Google images.
You have storyboards that you gotta get.
That's true.
But also at the same time, the illustrations become less dreamlike. They're more concrete and rigid.
Yes. The time of the capitals is slight. Like, it is a slight and gradual change in visuals, not just in the surroundings, the backgrounds, but in Kaguya herself.
Well, no, I mean, there's a lot of, like, little change. I won't say little. There's a lot of changes that happen.
Yes.
But it works so well because, one, it's less misty and dreamlike. But at the same time, there's still that wonder. The parents are living the part where Kaguya is like, what are you guys doing?
Why are you dressed so silly?
And also, it shows her immaturity because she forgets her old life real quickly for the new robes that were provided from the bamboo.
I mean, she's still a young kid being excited for new and for things that, yeah, even though she loved her old life, I'm sure dreaming of, like, the best outfit or the best wardrobe is not too far off.
Yeah, I mean, she's a creature of the moment.
Oh, definitely.
And just a couple of things. The animation of those sheer robes, it's beautiful, but it must have been a pain in the ass to do.
Definitely. 100%. But man, it looks so good.
Oh, it's so well done.
This movie in general, especially even by Ghibli standards, is gorgeous.
No, very much so. And also, for a little historical context, the capital of the Heian period was Heian-kyo, or modern-day Kyoto, and we actually touched on this ever so slightly, because this was established at the end of the era that was the Genpei War. We covered slightly in Takashi Miike's Sukiyaki Western Django about the war between the Heike or the Genji.
There it is. There's the reference.
It makes sense though. It does. It's not out of context.
No, despite this being honestly a fairy tale, and as we've seen with a lot of fairy tales, especially nowadays, being able to rework the story into different settings, different time periods is very easy, and honestly sometimes better. You can connect better with your audience, or you can tell a more compelling story. This one happens to put it in a time period that, while I think we see some of it in certain movies, it is a time period that, at least in the West, we don't talk about or see very often. So it feels even more fairy book and fanciful. Having this big palace, having all of this staff waiting for you. I think it's becoming a little more popular now in, like, the dramas and the romance genre. I know for a while it was popular in fantasy kung fu. At least that's where I was familiar best with it. I know there's a couple of genres of anime that, like, this time period is becoming popular again. Usually, again, romance dramas. But, like, it's not a super typical time period for us to hit. No.
The thing is like, because it is so far back. Like I said, this is...
Yeah, it's crazy old.
Yeah, this is set in, like, the 9th, 10th century. Like, this is, even for European standards, this isn't Roman, but it's still old as shit.
Yeah. No. And I think part of the reason why it's a genre we don't see a ton of is because even though it has some very impressive and beautiful architecture and very nice art to go with it, the stories that come out of this time period, much like Bamboo Cutter, are typically pretty short and sweet, if not lost completely.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a reason to set in this time period is kind of difficult.
Yeah, or partial, because that is a big thing with some of these stories is...
True.
And I'll get into it when we do get full into Folktober, is there's some stories where it's like, well, it ends here. We don't know where it goes from here because there's nothing else with any records we have.
Yeah, no. It's one of those time periods where, like, it's beautiful and it's fun, and I'm glad to see that it's kind of making something of a comeback as far as, like, interest in setting fictional times and places there. But it's a difficult one to do.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. But back to old school Kyoto.
Yes.
In comes Lady Sagami to tame the wild bamboo shoot.
She does her best.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Which, honestly, here of the characters in this movie, as much as I love everyone and how they're well done.
Sure.
My favorite character is the short assistant.
I agree. She's hilarious because she clearly has a fun and wild side. Once she's not under the teacher's thumb, her and Kaguya have a good time together. Oh, yeah.
She 100% is that, like, little mischief maker that's just, like, kind of there. And just the expressions she has through this whole movie.
She's a lot of fun.
If you want to study just a way to do comedic relief, what she reminds me a little bit of, like, Puck from Berserk.
Yeah.
Where, like, the rest of the movie is so serious.
Yeah.
But you need that little interjection of comedy that she provides.
And at no point is she ever the main focus of almost any scene. She's just in the background, kind of living her life.
Yeah. The first thing we see is she's, like, peeking into the carriage and she's got, like, that little, like, kind of cat look face to her.
She's a little bit of a frog-shaped face. Yeah.
It's cute.
She's very cute.
It's adorable. But it also works because even though we have this serious moments, Kaguya is still rebellious.
Yeah.
She's exploring new things, which is admirable. She's trying to take on her new life, but she's not...
She's not conforming.
Yet.
Yeah.
To a point even then, too.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing about this is here's what I think is interesting. Is she lived with nature for a year. Well, not even a year.
Yeah.
But civilization is there to remove the child from her.
True. I also think that this is one of those moments where the fantasy of being a princess and then the actual work it takes are two different things. And I think, at least in the West, we have a lot of fantasies about wanting to be a princess and how, like, fun and easy.
Fuck no.
Yeah.
I've never had those fantasies.
Because you were never a little girl. But let me tell you, Princess Diaries changed a lot of people's opinions on the idea of wanting to maybe be a princess.
I think the issue is I've been a history nerd since I was a kid. So, like...
Nobody wants to be a historical princess. That would suck dick.
Well, they did, but...
Well, yeah. But, like, a modern idea of being a princess is something that is still very fanciful. You should know this. You have watched a Christmas Prince.
Oh my god. It
is this not realistic, incredible fantasy, which I think bleeds a little bit into this story. I think it's a very smart telling that Takahata added this little bit of, like, of course she wants to please her parents. She does try to an extent.
Oh, but no. She doesn't just try to an extent. She is absolutely perfect when her father's around.
Yes, she will do anything for her parents, including becoming the perfect princess. But I think the way he managed to incorporate very sneakily, very quietly, this idea of, like, the idea of being a princess honestly kind of sucks. There's a lot more work than just wearing nice clothes and waving cutely. Like, you have to put in a lot of time and effort into learning a skill, into learning all this history and knowledge that you need to be an interesting conversationalist at best.
Yeah.
Like, is boring. It's not fun to have to sit there and do politics and history class all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but I can't say shit because that's how I got into Japanese shit, is because I was looking through a medieval weaponry book and I'm like, saw a katana, I'm like, that's neat. Alright, well now I'm into this shit now.
Sure, but it's one of those things where, like, there's a difference between enjoying self-proclaimed discovery and knowledge and having a set, rigid recommendation of, like, how you must sit, what you must learn, when you are to learn it, every minute of your day planned out.
The way you're explaining this just makes me think of, like, why Aleister Crowley rebelled against the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Is like,
yes, it is.
There is a specific order you have to do to learn all this secret hidden knowledge, and now...
Yes, no, it is a bunch of bullshit, but it is bullshit that she is willing to learn, but only for her parents' happiness. She doesn't want it for herself, really.
Not her parents' happiness, her father's happiness.
I think it is. I think with...
No, it's not with her mom.
No. Okay, so I see what you're saying, because her mom clearly does not enjoy living at the palace.
No.
But her mom does want what's best for her, which is why her mom is here in the first place. It's why she agreed to come. It's why she's not making a fuss. And so I think that despite her father being the main motivator in a lot of these instances, because he's the one who has the power and the ability to promote her as a princess.
Feminist undertones.
It is, but also it's time period undertones, right?
Yeah. Because it's not that so in your face, like, God, what was the fucking the Black Christmas remake?
Yes. No, exactly. And, like, yes, I agree a lot of people definitely saw this film and saw the feminism tones and the restrictions put on Princess Kaguya to be a princess and really latched onto that. And I agree. But I also think that there's a lot of historical context that Takahata put into this film intentionally, because her father would have been the only one capable of giving her the life that he thinks she wants, the gods want for her.
Exactly.
And she clearly loves him enough to be like, if you think this is what will bring me happiness and, like, this is what's best for me, I will play along.
And that's exactly why when her father shows up, she performs the koto perfectly.
This is true. But I think she also does it for the sake of her mom. She knows her mom's not crazy happy here. That's why they hang out in the kitchen together.
No.
But she is willing to do her best because she knows it's also a reflection on her mom without any spoken.
You went stereotypical with the kitchen.
I mean...
They don't hang out in the kitchen. They hang out in the old part of the house as very much like their kitchen. It's like the one-room apartment weaving together.
Sure. But, I mean, it's still the idea, though, of her mom is willing to do whatever is going to make her daughter happy. And her daughter, will do whatever her mom thinks, like, without any direct conversation. They are doing whatever they think each other will be happy with.
I think that's where it's twisted a little bit, too, is their reflection on what the other one will be happy with is based off what the father wants for Kaguya.
Yes, but I think she is a mother figure who, and I know a lot of people disagree and don't think it's a great way, but it is a fundamental personification of a type of person who will agree that whatever the husband thinks is best.
Fundamentalism.
Sure. And it's, for the time period, fairly accurate for what we know from records.
No, exactly. I mean, that is how it has been on any culture you go to for the most part. It's been male-dominated.
And clearly her father still loves and dotes on her mother, because even though it makes him upset that her mom hangs out in the not rich, fancy part of the house.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, he bitches that she's like, oh, you're in the gardens, why are you here?
But at the same time, he has the power to make her go somewhere else. He has the power, he has the men power. But he doesn't. He indulges her.
No, exactly. And it's shown in not just their demeanor, but also the way they dress. The mom dresses back down to the peasant, whereas the dad is still playing the part where he's dressed up in his court attire.
And because he has to. Because if he wants his little girl to actually be a princess, she can't be the one on display. He has to be the one on display.
Exactly, and that's why she's hidden most of the movie from the suitors.
True.
But this is also the turning point in the fact that she's actually taking on the lessons, but also the seasons have changed. It's a reflection on there's new crops, there's winter crops, despite what a lot of the early farm sims might make you think there are winter crops.
There definitely are. And the other thing that I think gets overlooked by this point in the movie is she has not stopped growing. She is still acceleratedly growing. She came in at like a middle school age. She's now in high school age.
I know. She came here still in elementary school because, well, I'm going to say middle school. I might be a little off on my biology because she has her menarche.
She does. It depends on the girl heavily.
Yes, I'm aware. So, but that's why I'm thinking like middle school age is from the people I've known.
Sure. I've known plenty of people who don't start until their 30s.
Yes.
So it depends on the person.
Yes.
I'm saying high school because of how serious she ends up taking her studies. So 8th grade.
Middle school.
Yeah. Depending on where you are. Some people call that junior high.
Sure. But this is where we get her coming of age, finally.
Yes.
Which, this is where she comes out as a quote-unquote true princess.
Yes, she is given a proper princess name.
Not 100% yet. Soon. But this is the part where we see her kind of getting bored with nobility. Mm-hmm. The walled garden also pairs nicely with it, and her looking at the birds mm-hmm. that can fly away.
Sure.
She still has this connection to Earth. That's why she's out there working with the garden, wanting to have her own little patch of the garden too.
Yeah.
But you can see that she's not happy with the formality and the customs of nobility.
Definitely.
And especially there's that line, and this is why I think it starts really defining her from what she used to be. There's a line, a noble princess isn't human.
Yes,
and
is true.
She's already not human, and that's the thing, is that maybe that happiness is not being what's expected of royalty or of higher, quote-unquote, higher humanity.
Sure. I know some people in their reviews of this movie talk about how they thought a secondary big theme that they caught in the movie was a desire to hide from responsibilities. She left the moon because she did not want to be the perfect princess on the moon. She wanted to experience happiness and emotions, mm-hmm. which I can see, especially paired with this scene of her being told regularly that princesses shouldn't smile, they shouldn't have, laugh, they shouldn't have their mouth open. That's why you can paint your teeth black.
That was...
It was just a little earlier in the scene, I know.
But, well... The other thing with that is that was a beauty standard, was shaving the eyebrows and painting your teeth black. I don't know specifically. What I know of it is during the Sengoku era, that was more of a beauty standard for a newlywed, and then that kind of fell out of favor in the Edo era.
Sure. I mean, this movie, the way they do their best to explain it through some quick dialogue between her and her teacher, is her teacher talks about you can paint your teeth black and you won't have to worry about smudging them because you really don't need to be talking a lot. You really don't need to be laughing. Mm-hmm. That's why you can wear this crazy makeup, is because you're not doing anything. You're sitting still most of the day and you're being a good conversationalist sometimes.
You're an object.
You are.
Yeah.
And for some people, the idea of that wealth and security is happiness. That's for her teacher. She's trying to explain, this is happiness. You do not have to worry about a damn thing.
Well, it's also where this is the turning point where she moves from being this doted on daughter to being a sex object for a lot of these men, where they, even though they haven't seen her, they've heard of who she is because of her name, specifically of Princess Kaguya, or Shining Light.
Shining Light in Bamboo, or something like that, is I think the full bit that he talks about. But yeah, it's a very interesting and specialized name. It's not your average name.
Well, it's a suppressing of who she is too, where she's given this specific name that's given her a name that's put her basically in, what's the term, on a pedestal?
Yeah, sure. She's idolized.
Yeah, idolized. That's the term I'm thinking of.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is another differentiance between, and I see again where some of the ideas of fear of responsibility come in, because for her parents, especially for her father, this would be a way of guaranteeing your daughter's well-being and safety mm-hmm. and happiness. Is if she can marry the richest man in the country, she will never have to work for anything. She will always be taken care of. Even if something happens to him, she will still have money. Mm-hmm. Might not be as much money, but it'll be more money than he'll ever have, despite the gods handing him literally buckets of money.
Well, here's the thing. I guess I don't understand the disregarding of responsibility, because really she doesn't have a maybe responsibility in marrying right now,
sure,
but to the extent how much of a responsibility really even is that?
At this time period, it would have been a very big responsibility. Okay. As a daughter, especially the oldest daughter, and being presented as a princess, this would have been your one responsibility, was to be a perfect representation of your family, because even after you're married, you are still introduced as daughter of, and then your family name. Granted, you would always be presented as your husband's name, not your name.
Get me that best dowry.
Yeah, and so you're not just securing your future for yourself, you'd be securing your parents' lives too. Because any money that any money you had could go to them. They would probably be taken care of as well during this time period.
That's still kind of a weird-ass thing of, thank you for putting all this energy and resources into this daughter that's now part of our family. I guess maybe it's just my perception of the intertwining of families when someone gets married.
Sure. And I mean, that's a very modern idea. Mm-hmm. At the time, it would have been, thank you for creating this well-educated, well-behaved, well-mannered, hopefully producing well heirs person that I will be taking on as my wife. Here is your money for raising her.
I can see that.
And if you're high up enough, which, I mean, she is, that would be a lifelong, like, settlement. Like, if her dad dies, her mom would move in with her.
Mm-hmm.
She'd move in with the husband's family. Like, she would get her own house, probably, if he's wealthy enough.
So we have the mother-in-law estate.
It is exactly why you have mother-in-law estates. But think bigger.
Yeah. No, I think I see it now, where it's like the I think there's a disconnect of, in the West, a lot of times we live separate from our parents, whereas probably at this time, the multicultural or the multi-generational living conditions.
Yeah, while her dad lived, he would probably still maintain this palace, but it'd be expected that she live close to this palace. And if they didn't, they'd probably move to be, like, next door to their daughter.
But you do kind of see the opposite of, and I know it's a much more modern story about wolf children.
Yeah, it's a similar idea of, like, continual family and support of that family. So her duty is to not just support herself, because that's a bit where she's being selfish of like, I don't want to marry anyone. But it would have been, even though she is young because it's like, what, her second year?
She's like 14 or 15, maybe 13.
Yeah, but she hasn't had the time and experience that a normal human child has had.
She hasn't even gotten through a full year. We haven't even gotten to spring again. It's still technically winter.
That's true. So this, I mean, like, there is potentially some miscommunication because she's naive in the world, but it would have been expected that as the oldest and only daughter and child, if she puts her heart and, like, really works on this, she would be taking care of her parents for the rest of their lives. Especially if she marries the emperor.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But I do think that there is this change in tone where, because for the rest of the year before this, she's been, like, the focus of her parents.
Yes.
But now that she's all dolled up for the banquet, for her naming ceremony, she's become invisible to the world. And in a way, she kind of loses herself.
A little bit.
Because her identity has been based on her parents, for the most part, on what they provide, what they've allowed her to do. And she becomes this kind of, like, hidden beauty, where at the same time, she's experienced and seeing the ugliness of the men's desires for women's beauty, and finding that she isn't a quote-unquote real princess when they're asking the dad of, like, how much did you pay to get her a princess name?
Sure. I also think this is a good, like, backing up of her taking on the identity of whatever name she is given and called by. She now has a new princess name and title that all of these strangers call her by. And so she does her best to become that person, even though she clearly doesn't like it.
Well, it also does a good job with, like, that early teenage angst, and also rapidly, quickly through her progression as a now kind of adult in this world, where we get to see her raw anger and emotion in the animation, where it's beautiful and just it feels raw and angry when she goes to seek out her old ways. And this is also where I find this movie beautiful.
Oh, definitely.
And the foreshadowing, where the moon, we start to see it more heavily prominent. Definitely. From this moment on, because when she's running back to escape to get to her village, the moon's behind her. Yes. And she kind of feels like Wraith-like a little bit in her running.
Yeah, the removal of all of the robes. And even robes that she's not even wearing. It's the idea of her stripping herself of all of these, like, silkens and royalties and treasures. So that she can be truly happy again.
Yeah, losing the adornment of the status to go back to simplicity. In a way where, when she was catching the pheasant, she stripped off her cloak or whatever robe she was wearing.
Yeah, her outer layer.
To be like one of the other kids.
Well, that, and to use it. It was a tool instead of a treasured thing that she must wear and, like, parade around in.
Exactly. And it is a sad moment, too, because when she does get back to her town, the village has moved on. I mean, it's a shock to her that it also just shows her maturing a little bit, too, because, honestly, she has been a little self-centered and not realizing that she's not the center of absolutely everyone's universe.
Sure. Again, she has not actually been alive that long. And though she has matured and aged rapidly, she's still a kid. I mean, at best, she's a young adult who is still struggling with this idea of self and the idea of happiness and what does it mean to actually be happy. She has people around her telling her what they think is happiness, and she's not quite sure if she agrees.
Yeah. But when we do get back to the village, I mean, everything has that dreamlike border again.
Yeah.
It's just... there's also this thing, too, where she's devoid of what it does to take... what's required to take care of nature, because her friends have moved on, not just because they had to, or they did have to, but because they left because they were trying to take care of nature.
Yes.
There was not enough trees, and so for them to grow back, they had to move on to another grove of trees.
Yes. And she at this point is still confused about what winter is, because she looks around, she's like, oh, everything's dead. What happened? He's like, it's winter, you idiot.
Yeah, there's that hope for the return of spring.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting part, because she comes back and it seems like it was all a dream. So was any of that really real?
I think it was a dream. And I say that because I think that is a great way for a time period appropriate and character appropriate release of anger and frustration and fantasy. She dreams of running away, but she knows she can't. That would be detrimental to her family.
Or is it spiritual projection? Because she is a god. She technically has been able... We see later on that she's able to move from one body to the next.
True. It's a chance. It's a possibility. It's not really ever made clear. I think it's a great way, though, regardless of whether or not it's just her projecting or her dreaming, for her to explore this, like, great desire that she has without directly creating a problem for her family who, like we've talked about, she loves them so much that she's willing to become this Princess Kaguya, even though she clearly does not like it. She would prefer to be literally anywhere else.
Well, that is a very good way to put it, because it is very much so that hard snap back to reality, where she knows nothing will ever return to the way it used to be. And this is when she fully submits, when she removes her eyebrows, blackens her teeth. Everything's completely changed. And we see it, too, that she still has that little lingering of hope, because she's given a caged bird and she sets it free.
She does. And I think it also has to do with this idea of not wanting to force anyone else to be captured with her. She clearly can tell that her parents are her father's enjoying himself to an extent. Her mother has a retreat in the old part of the home where she doesn't have to be part of the social events.
I don't think we ever see the mother in formal attire except for that first scene when they get to the castle, or not castle, their manor or
palace.
I don't know if it's a palace. I think it's a manor.
It's big.
Yeah.
But yeah, her mom has a retreat at least, and she doesn't want anyone else trapped here with her. At least everyone else in her life chooses to be here.
Yeah, well, and there's also an interesting change in her attitude where she's actually cold to her father a bit more now, where...
Yes.
I think she has an understanding of they've gone this route because it's what her father thought was best. And even though she's not happy about it, she's still... Well, she isn't... We know she's not happy about it. It's this understanding of how it's her finally kind of understanding how the world's going to work from here on out. And despite how happy she was where she was, it is her father's fault they're there. It
is. But like I said, the love she has clearly dominates over that. She thinks this is making her father happy, so she is going to stick it through.
Yep. No, exactly. We hear later with a line that I have written down. But the word of her beauty has spread, and we see men flocking to her to the point where the world is being brought to her through the chubby short maid bringing her cherry blossoms, because now she can't even go out to the real world.
No, she is trapped in the palace.
And even to like the point where like she's so well known that even the nobles are like, despite them being hoity-toity and trying to be as formal, when they find out it's like, oh, she might not be of this realm. They kind of lose their formality a little bit.
They do. In fact, they embarrass themselves a bit as in trying to compete for her attention.
I mean, it's a dream come true for her father. It's proposals, and we learn, I mean, I don't know the customs, but we find out that she's not going to even meet this man until her father, or until their wedding day. And
I mean, that's pretty traditional. Yeah.
I don't know, but
it is. It's pretty traditional for the father and sometimes the mother to have an input. Fully picking your husband, you meet him when you are getting married.
Well, and she is still a little rebellious. I mean, we get a bit where she's playing with some cats, and it's like, you should not be doing this.
No, she's clearly still herself, which I think her dad misinterprets as her still being a bit herself. She's not fully transformed into this ideal princess.
Yeah.
Which I think gives him a bit of a false sense of hope that he's doing the right thing, like she is finding joy in this life.
Well, and I think there's a couple things here is that the teacher is quite manipulative and trying to get her to do as I say, not as, like...
Sure, and I mean, I know the teacher is written to be somewhat a bad guy, but I also think that she was told, like, hi, I have a very problematic child, but I need her to be a princess. Do your damned best.
I don't think she was told that she's a problematic child at all for their society. She's just like, we need you to turn this girl this country bumpkin into a princess.
Which, I mean, would definitely interpret if I was a tutor to be like, a what into a princess?
Princess Diaries.
Very much. And I mean, I've watched that movie several times.
Or even like The Devil Wears Prada, where she's...
There's a lot of bits that if you're not born into that world, it would take forever for you to learn. And so while I think the teacher's written to be dislikable, I think you're meant to dislike her. I don't think at any point is she truly ever wrong or evil. I think she is truly doing what she has known in the palace to work for other princesses that she has helped train. If you are quiet, if you are pretty, if you can learn a good skill, like, oh, you're good at painting, oh, you're good at the music instrument, maybe you're good at dancing. If you can get good at that, we can get you a decent husband and you can have a good life.
Like the matchmaker in Mulan.
Yes. Yeah, the matchmaker was never wrong. Mulan just was very clumsy.
Well, and it's a way too, it kind of makes me think of like a little bit of like the process of growing and trimming bonsai.
Yeah.
Where she used to be this fast, rapid growing bamboo that kind of lived by its own whims, where now she is she's being forced into the social constraint that she's this object that the powers want, that the powers Abby should want.
Yes, she has to fit into their society to survive and succeed.
Yes. Or, well...
At least in this method. At least for what her father understands.
Yeah, in this trajectory of the life that she's been presented.
And remember, again, her father believes that he has divine intervention, that she is to be a princess. He truly thinks that he is doing, I mean, by a Western standpoint, the God's work. It's that meme.
It's like, what do you know what's best for me? Because I think so, or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where he gets carried away, but at the same time, I think if you were told by the gods, like, if you do this, your daughter will be happy, you would do it.
Well, that's the thing, is that he's not told. He's given clothing and gold.
But he interprets it as.
Yes.
And so he's going to go with it. He's running with it. And honestly, he's doing a damn good job. So I'm not surprised that he overlooks her upsetness, because he's like, look, we are so close. Princes are interested in you. That's big news.
So is this also maybe a commentary on interpreting the will of the gods?
I think so, yeah. Especially for a tale based off of this style. These old tales are not as directly talking to God as Christian tales are. There's not a priest, there's not a pope to give you instructions like with the old Catholic tales. There's not prayer in the same way that Christians recognize prayer as like direct speaking. Yeah,
there was one story of this monk who he's been praying to some Buddha. I can't remember if it's Kannon or some other one, but eventually they're like, we haven't answered your prayers because you had a bunch of shitty lives. This is your karmic cycle. We thought you would have caught on, but you know what? Here's a straw, and then he slowly advances and like gives the piece of straw to someone else who gives him water.
There's a lot more. Are you paying attention? Are you reading the signs?
Yeah.
As opposed to being directly told, right? Like, I think a lot of Western tales you get directly told by either a religious power or God.
Go find the Holy Grail for me, King Arthur.
Yes. A lot of that.
Prophecy.
Versus, hey, today I saw two birds being sweet to each other in the river. I think it's a good sign. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I see it now.
Yeah. It's a lot more interpretation. So I think even though we would probably say like, oh, there's so much room for interpretation from the father's point of view, why couldn't he see Princess Kaguya's unhappiness and maybe rethink his decision? I don't think so. I think he would have seen those signs. He says multiple times, this is a sign from the gods. This is a good sign. We must continue with this sign. Like,
again, the lucky cricket from Mulan.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it pays. Normally, those stories pay out. Like, if you do follow the sign through, that's kind of the moral that these stories give. If you follow through the signs, if you follow through with the faith and the trust, something good happens.
Yeah, there's one specifically of this hunter who meets a woman and is saved because her husband, who's some, I can't remember if it's Oni or like a kitsune, is like, I'll protect you, but you can't tell anyone about this. Or I've told you you're my brother. Or no, I told him you're my brother, so you'll be fine. But now he wants you to visit. And the dude goes back to town and tells everyone. And so they go to kill the beast, and everyone who went to go kill the beast dies.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of, like, do things in good faith and, like, do things to benefit others, and good will happen back to you.
Yeah, you get what you put out into the universe. That whole kind of thought process.
And I can 100% see where the father thinks he is putting the most good he can out into the universe for his daughter.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what he's trying to do.
Yeah.
Because even when we meet the suitors, he's like super excited by everyone. Because they're giving such bold words for never have meeting her or have seen her beauty of like, it's like you look at like the jeweled trees of Mount Hiei, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, a holy place in the world. Like God, like heaven on earth, essentially.
Horai.
Yeah. And I like what Takahata did here, where all of the suitors are significantly different, not just visually, but in the way they compare her. Mm-hmm. Because it gives a wider range of reasons for her to turn them down. Because if all of them had just been comparing her to Jules and all had been relatively the same looking dude, it would have been easy to clump all the suitors kind of into one. Mm-hmm. But if you resonate with one of these guys, you can kind of be like, oh, why wouldn't she pick that guy? He compared her to this thing, or, oh, he seemed really nice.
So there's a little bit to this, too. First off, all these men are out of sorts because the maid,
of course,
is fixing their coattails.
Yeah, no, they're a mess. They, like, they have pillows where they're supposed to sit in front of the screen where she can see them. They can't see her. None of them sit on the pillows. Mm-hmm. They're, like, battling to be as close to the screen as possible so that they're the center of her view.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, so the thing is like she's looking down on them, and it shows a little bit of her worldly knowledge of this thing doesn't exist. This is too untrue. But the thing that she's intrigued by is the more natural and the simple one. Unfortunately, that guy ends up dying, but it's the cowrie shell of the swallow, where it's like, she's like, okay, maybe this is accurate because, you know,
it at least intrigues her.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's also a tie back to nature. It's not like some mythical thing. It's this object that's produced by a basic animal compared to some fantastic tree in the middle of, like, who knows where.
Yeah, and it's a tree made of metal and jewels as opposed to a real tree.
Or the guy who's like the skin of the fire rat, which that involves killing an animal.
Yeah.
Although she does kill the pheasant. But
I don't think she has any problems with killing an animal, but I do think at this point she, especially with how much studying she does, she has an idea of what is a big fantasy. Mm-hmm. And the fire rat, the tree, and I can't remember, the dragon's neck, those are big fantasies. Those are things that are very common knowledge. They've got, like, those stories have, like, perpetrated even nowadays. Like, there's several kung fu movies dealing with all three of these topics. And so she would have run into those. I think the other two are a little less known, and they're more nature-based. So the idea, the hope that maybe those are real, does intrigue her.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And that's the thing, is like, it's the mystery still of nature and what's available.
Yeah. And I think we've reached the point, too, with her development where she has reached the point in youth where she understands the idea of love, but she has not yet experienced a romantic love. And so she can't yet even comprehend, like, because I think at this point in the movie, a lot of people say, oh, well, clearly she loves the guy from the beginning, her friend.
Mm-hmm. And that's not wrong.
It's not wrong, but I don't think that she has developed yet to a point to recognize what that feeling is.
She has the romanticized, the reason she's attached to that man, or that boy still, is because it's her romanticization of her life living in the country.
Which is not love.
No.
And she doesn't know that yet, because she's still too young to understand that.
Every Christmas movie, you would think that they'd understand that.
You would, but there is a fun in that romanticization. Mm-hmm. And with a lot of romance comedy movies, that idea is enough because the person watching it has experienced, like, enough of life to know, like, to imply more.
They've experienced heartbreak, which technically Kaguya has kind of experienced heartbreak.
A little bit, but not a romantic heartbreak in the sense that, like, the adults who are, like, fending for her aunt, they don't know that she's barely a year old.
It's been in she's had heartbreak in the romanticization of life on Earth.
Yes. Yeah. She has had her ideals broken. She has yet to have true love spoil her heart.
And because of that, she's a rebellious teenager that flips the societal expectations on their heads by asking them to produce said rare items so that way you can actually compare me to them.
Yes. And I don't think this is terribly too unwitty. Like, this is a pretty, smart way of getting rid of a suitor. It shows up in a couple other stories as well.
Well, I think I don't think it's unwitty. I think it's well placed in the fact that she's found out that people are going to start treating her as an object. So now she's like, produce an object that I'm supposed to be compared to.
Yes. And I think this is also the part where she leaves enough room for the two that she is somewhat interested in to potentially impress her. Mm-hmm. Because in theory, if these other two things are real, then she has not just had her heart healed from the disappointment that she's experienced so far in the world, but also potentially this idea of romance, which I think she's at that age in maturity where she has this idea of romance that she would like.
Well, I don't think it's 100% that. I think it's her way of trying to break out of her gilded cage where...
Definitely that.
With getting the 5-second best suitors out of her sight, she's able to be free. She gets
she enjoys herself for a while.
Yeah, despite her teacher quitting on her, she's now happy and she gets to be back to nature. And there's that beautiful frolicking scene amongst the cherry blossoms.
True.
But she unfortunately, even though she gets these little bits of freedom, because of her father putting her in that princess position, she's still on that idolization where she gets brought back down to reality after bumping into a peasant child, people that she would have been common folk with back in the day or before being a princess. And now she's no longer part of that world, and the cage is still there, preventing her from experiencing the world.
Yeah, society has now placed her in an awkward position where she no longer can interact with people the way she wants.
No, exactly. And it ruins that last little bit of freedom she has. Mm-hmm. To the point where she's like, I don't even want to be around the cherry blossoms. That, before this, the chubby little handmaiden had to bring to her to say, hey, here's some cherry blossoms.
Something she probably asked for.
No, 100% asked for. And she also gets her second dose of how horrible the world is because on their way back, the carriage is stopped by Sutamaru, who is now a thief.
Yes.
And gets his ass beat, almost to death, it feels like.
Yeah, he's down for the count.
Yeah. And the last time they both met each other over a bird. First time they caught a pheasant together, now he's stealing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And it's also just the cruelty of the outside world and how it can affect even the people close to her. And also the downpouring adds a lot to it.
I also think that this is the part that really opens her eyes to how powerless she is. Mm-hmm. I think for her father, he does not quite understand that this role truly is more of a cage than he thinks it is. Because to him, having this level of power gives a lot of freedom. He does not see the correlation of her not really being able to step in and do anything. If she had been a man, she could have said something and potentially created a different scenario.
Freedom from manual labor.
Freedom from manual labor, but it also gives you the societal ability to say and tell people what to do. Yeah. But as a woman, especially one labeled princess, she is not allowed to do that.
Probably better at the hardships of peasantry. Because I think that's also another play on the whole feminist undertone is that it's not so much that you're not in control or you have this wealth. It's that the women don't have power regardless of where they are in their lives. True. Or wherever they are in society.
True. And I think this is also the time where the drawing and animation style becomes the bleakest. Her eyes are done with much less detail. There's a lot less sparkle and interest. She stares kind of off into space a little bit more than looking directly at something. The colors are a little bit more muted. Yep. The background is almost non-existent at times. It's just kind of in the foreground and stuff. There's not the great big scenes. There's not any attention to the sky. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where, as an audience, we with Kaguya remember back to her life as a peasant and how beautifully that was drawn and have that equal romanticization with her of what that life was like.
And I think yes and no. a little bit there, because we do cut to 3 years later and we get to see the cat that she was playing with earlier has had kittens.
Mm-hmm.
But Kaguya and her mother are still weaving.
They are.
So even though she's still very close with her mother and the gardens flourished, it's a little bit ingrown now. She stopped caring about nature a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, she would be doing the same stuff. If she had been a peasant, she would have been working with her mom day in and day out weaving.
Sure. I think her working with her mom is her and her mother both being given the freedom to do what would have been just peasant work.
Yeah.
Because it entertains them.
Yes and no. Royal women still...
They did, but not like this. This
No.
is them being entertained and being given the freedom to do this as kind of like, oh, well, yes, they're a little weird, but like it gives them happiness, so let them at it.
Yeah, not like... you haven't seen it yet, but our first movie of Folktober.
Yeah, it's no Marie Antoinette with her fake farm. But the two of them do bond in their unhappiness, but also I think just mother and daughter.
I don't think it's unhappiness with the mother. I think the mother's just content wherever she's at.
Yes and no. I think the mother's the type of person to never directly tell you she is unhappy. And I think that's just partially a characteristic and also partially the way of the times.
The reserved stereotype of the housewoman.
A little bit, yeah. And I also think that's just, for some people, that is how they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a combination of those two, that works really strongly here, because there's not really room for the mother's unhappiness in this story. We're very focused on Kaguya. We're very focused on her father. Those are two big characters. But we are invested in the relationship her mom has, because those little lines that she has between her where, is it something you can't even tell your mommy? Because clearly they spend their whole day talking to each other while they're weaving. Like, they have a very strong bond.
Yeah. Especially later on, because we do have a little bit of the moon rising in the background, setting the tone for the final third of the movie. Because up until then, we've only seen the moon one other time when she was in true stress or trauma of oh shit, I'm not gonna have this life anymore. I think that's what's important, is the moon is always making an appearance when life is hardest for her.
When she's the most unhappy.
It's that little, not Faustian bargain, but it's like that little devil whispering over the shoulder of here's an easy way out of your existence.
I think an easy way out, but I also think the way that the moon people are written and the way that the director kind of portrays the moon is it's kind of implied that she is a young person on the moon planet as well, and they are watching out for her. Mm-hmm. Every time she throws up this isn't fun anymore, they are checking in, do you need me to come pick you up? No? Okay. You haven't said that it's a bad party yet, so we're gonna let you stay at the sleepover.
Your toddler threw up, but he doesn't have a fever. Maybe he ate too much.
Yeah, no, it feels a little bit like that, where they're look, we know she's a kid, but she seems to be having fun. She just didn't like that one thing, so okay, you can stay at the birthday party a little longer, honey. It feels very much like that. And I think that's intentional. I think that the moon people are not meant to be the villains, right?
Mm-hmm. No, they're not.
But I think they're also meant to be some above humans, right? So they're just checking in on their like weird child that wanted to go to the weird human birthday party.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. But now we start getting the prince or the suitors coming back. Prince Kumarochi is back with the jeweled branch of Horai, which, note for the people who don't know, Horai is a legendary land with the fountain of youth and disease-curing fruits where there's no pain and misery. It comes from Chinese folklore, and it's basically like their land of milk and honey.
Sure, a little piece of heaven on earth.
Yeah, exactly, which is what the moon's supposed to be, too.
Well, the moon is not on Earth. There is no attaining getting to the moon unless you can fly.
Oh, yeah. Well, and also, by the time this movie is out, and way before that, Lafcadio Hearn, who's this Greek-Irish folklorist who introduced the West to, or not introduced, but popularized Japanese folklore in Europe and the Americas, mainly the Americas, doesn't describe it as so much so as being this land of milk and honey. It's more so this mythological land.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that version more and more in movies and TV shows recently, where it's kind of like a second plane that exists alongside Earth. I think that version has been very popular. I kind of like this one where it's it's this mythical, unattainable place.
Yeah, well, you see that in other mythology or other folk tales where someone's wandering the countryside lost or wandering the mountains lost and they stumble upon this land that's supposed to be amazing, or they have to overcome some obstacle. Like there's one where some dude sees someone walk behind a waterfall, but he was led back there because he's supposed to be this sacrifice for the monkeys that are eating people.
Sure, and in the West, we see it a lot with the land of fairies. Like, you accidentally end up in the fairy realm because you were stumbling around, messing around.
Yeah.
It happens a lot. It's a pretty common trope.
Yeah, getting spirited away is, I think, what it's called.
I believe so.
Yeah. But I also enjoy that the father still never gets over being a bumbling country man.
No, bless him.
Yeah, he's a little goofy, and the prince in this is goofy as well. Like, he's ugly looking.
He is.
But it's a trick that Kaguya easily sees through, which I think the playing up of his plight is what makes it funny, and that even she knows it, and it's ruined even more so because the father's like, come on, you gotta admit, this is the real thing. This is the real deal.
Yeah.
But it's ruined because he didn't pay his artist.
If he had just paid his artist, it would have been a very convincing fake.
And on top of that, the artist comes in saying he ordered this for one of his concubines and asked for Kaguya to pay for it because the prince didn't do it. And I think that's great to show his... It's a nice...
What type of person he is.
Yeah, great to show his goals, and not that they didn't already know, but...
But it, really solidifies it, especially for the later gentleman.
Mm-hmm. It gives a reason that the father doesn't want this man to be his son-in-law.
Yeah, he's not gonna fight for this guy.
Mm-hmm. And then we get Grand Counselor Otomo, who's out sailing for the gem with the dragon, who is... absolutely stupid. We also see...
This poor guy's the dumbest of all of them.
Oh, I don't know.
He's brash, he's bold, he's fighting the god.
He sent his wife away to rebuild them and rebuilt a mansion for her, so...
Yeah, and then he went out into the ocean, got so spooked by lightning that he's seeing dragons and things.
Well, it's also, I think it's an interesting way of showing nature's might over humans.
It definitely is. I also think it's a good way of showing where a lot of these legends probably are coming from, at least for this story. The dragon is clearly fake. He's just seeing it in the clouds and in the, whirlpool. He got spooked by the lightning and the storm. He's all worked up.
But, so here's something, too. It's tied in with mythology because dragons are tied to water, and thunderstorms depends on the dragon releasing their rage and their energy and whatnot.
100%, but even the sailor who's on the same boat with him is like, dude, get yourself together.
Yeah. Well, he's royalty. He's like, I have the power. I'm chosen by God so that I can do this. I have the power of God and anime on my side.
And the sailor's like, if you have God and anime on your side, I'm going to rope you to the boat because you're going to fall off, you dumbass.
No, exactly. And then Princess Ishitaka shows up next with Lord Buddha's begging bowl, which, it shows his devotion.
Mm-hmm. He picks something a little bit more spiritual than the others to compare her to.
Yes, and then he's also, but I found these flowers. This is my devotion. The flower in the field, and it's enticing with the nature and the country all bringing together. And
you'll notice that he brought both, and he kind of judged to see which one might get more interest, and he went with that one. And I like that it's done in such a way that if you are not looking for it, he would be a convincing suitor. Mm-hmm. He puts on a very good show, and yet she does call him out on his show.
She doesn't, though. She is very intrigued in this, and then her mother taps her on the shoulder of like, hey, honey.
Watch this.
Well, learn a little bit. Men are smooth with their words, and you're getting roped into, I think this is her mother knowing that she is so tied to nature and knows the nature of her daughter. That's like, you're getting roped in. You're being catfished.
100%. And I think this is a fun way of having the daughter truly see what his intentions are. Because if he had been truly oh, you're playing and your conversation, despite them not having any conversation, showing the mother instead would have been a fun farce of I would still marry you, and then the actual princess.
Well.
But no, he's like, oh my god, no!
You're ugly.
Yeah.
An old-ish.
Because honestly, the only thing he was truly in love with, because again, Kaguya is so interested in his flowery words and his big promises that he's making, that she misses the part where he hasn't actually talked to her at all.
Nope.
And he doesn't know what she looks like.
Exactly.
And so she's forgetting all of that, and her mom's like, honey, you remember that this man does not know you at all? He's just heard you play your instrument. for like 5 minutes.
Not even that. Just talk to her. Or not even
he
talk to
her. He talked at her.
Yeah, no,
talked
exactly.
at the screen. There could be nobody there. He wouldn't know.
Yeah, true. Exactly. But now we find that middle counselor Isao Nakami, trying to get the swallow's cowrie shell, died in the effort.
Very sad.
Which
it does seem to make her upset too. And I don't think it's because she was truly interested in him. I think she feels bad that someone died because of her.
No, that's exactly what it is it was never intended for anything to go that far. She was just trying to
get them off her back.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And her projecting the misery that it's a projection of the misery that she's feeling.
True.
And this is where, once again, in a time of toil, the moon comes back.
It does. It does.
Because the Majesty himself, the Emperor, is now interested. Because he's put it in his delusional mind that, oh, she's this beautiful. It's because she's holding out for me.
Yes. And this is the way they portray the Emperor is fantastic. Because he's not too over the top. He's not too ugly. But he is very delusional. And he's just really... Oh man, he's something.
He is the ego and the personification of man with absolute godlike powers on Earth, or think they have godlike powers.
I mean, at this time period, he practically has godlike powers on Earth. The fact that he summons her to court, she truly should not have been able to say no. Death would have been the correct response.
No, that's exactly what she says, and the father's like, you can't do that. And it's like, it goes back to that father's perception of, this is what's best for you. I mean, of course, the Emperor wants you to be his wife, or one of his wives.
It would have set them up forever, and also would have promoted him from commoner to nobility. It would have promoted their whole family.
Well, it's her first real rebellion against her father now.
True.
And she's seeking death over captivity, and that was really showing that she doesn't want to be here anymore.
This is true.
And unfortunately, it backfires on her because he comes to her, which is a huge thing.
It is. This is fairly unheard of.
Mm-hmm. And the way the shots of this movie are filmed very carefully.
Yeah.
And the way she refuses his power, we get to see that ethereal escape that we saw a little bit earlier on. In
the almost fairy-like way of leaving.
Mm-hmm. Which we saw it once in her dream, going back to her old land. But now this is
the true awakening of her as a moon child.
This is her first escape from the physical.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
And it also shows that the Emperor believes that the happiness is in the fate of powerful men.
Oh, and up to this point, he's not been wrong.
Nope, exactly. Because now the moon is fully back and it's her focus.
Yes.
Where even her earthly work of weaving with her mother is no longer her interest.
Yeah, her mom can't even get her to sing with her anymore.
And at the same time, she doesn't want to go back to the moon. It's everything is now absolutely beyond her fate. She was hopeless in the human world, and now she has no control of them coming back to get to her. And this is where the probably the most heart-wrenching line in this movie is, that happiness you wished for me was hard to bear.
Yeah, it's very heart-wrenching because clearly that was how she saw it, and they saw it the other way around.
Yeah, and it shows because she truly came down to live in happiness with nature. She never wanted to move to the capital or move anywhere else besides where she was found.
And it does beg the question of if she would have truly been happy if the gods had not intervened.
No, exactly. Well, and I think she would have, because the father is now moving to her whims, where she's like, I don't want to go back. And so now he's rearing up the troops. He's getting some people from somewhere getting ready to shoot down the gods or spear them.
Yeah, he's going to fight God himself.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we get the grief and sadness gone with the robe of the moon. I mean, that's where we're going to learn that she's going to lose her memories. Mm-hmm. And we find out that this is where the song had the second bit to it.
Yeah.
Which is very... We talked about the seasons a little bit. I think we're in spring now. And she's lived an entire year on Earth. And we've got that cyclical nature started of like, well, she's lived a year now. It's time to kind of die on Earth.
Yeah, to be done.
And she does one last trip back to home, but in this, we get the little bit of the old flames back, he's back with the family now, which...
It's a little awkward, but also I think the way it's done is meant to show that he has never stopped liking her, or like, and he has also had this desire for love for her as well.
Yeah,
but at this point they were both too young to recognize it originally, and she left well before they could have possibly thought about that.
And on top of that, it's just another symbol of life moves on, that the last time they saw each other, she's a princess and he is a thief stealing a chicken.
Yes. And now he has moved on. He has a family. He seems to have taken up the family business of woodcutting. They're at least going back to build a new house. But yeah, like, he has moved on, and as far as we can tell, I mean, I wouldn't say he's overjoyed in his new life, but he doesn't seem upset in it either.
No. I mean, this bit is just a last goodbye to what could have been for Kaguya.
Yes.
Where we get the happiness and simplicity, we get the contrast that she's very pale compared to him. She sheds her robe as she did to play in the fields like a peasant child, and their flying, while magical, is also a little bit sorrowful because they can't escape it, because she's losing her, like, she is probably flying, but she also doesn't have the full powers that she could have.
No.
And when she falls, and I think it's also a little bit of a dream too, because it is kind of a heavy moment, because the music just stops, and there's music and there's no special effects sound effects as they fall.
Yeah.
And it just, life moves on, and
yeah, he wakes back up and has to keep working on his new house with his new family.
Yeah. And she's back at the mansion.
Yeah.
Which
and I like the way that they wrote that part, because it feels both dreamlike and both realistic enough to make it feel like if she had not gone back and reconnected with him, it would not have been closure for her. But at this point, is it even closure for him? Or did she just reopen memories and hurt for him? Is this the last selfish act on her part?
I think it's the last selfish act on her part.
I do too.
Because, honestly, he's never going to forget her.
No. Especially now.
Well, and she's going to forget him. We already know that once she goes to the moon, she's going to forget everything about this existence.
And he clearly had moved on enough to have a wife and a family and an extended family or group that he's, like, working with. And then she comes back in and is like, hey, I've always loved you, even as we were kids. And he's like, oh man, I've always loved you too. And she's like, okay, I'm going to the moon now, bye.
Yeah. Well, it's something that's out of her control. It's her last, it's selfish, but it's her last attempt at rebellion of like, hey, maybe if I can, and probably because he's moved on is because she can't have him. Like, this was her last attempt at earthly happiness to like maybe convince the moon gods of like, I'm happy. See, I can have happiness here. I'm fine. Leave me.
I also think it is the last attempt at convincing herself she would have been happy if she had just stayed where she was. And while I agree she would have been happier away from the city, we cannot know she would have been happy there.
No.
Because when you live that level of poor, you are moments away from death at all the time. She just didn't know that because she was a kid.
She would have been there stealing with them.
Probably. Or starved to death at some point.
But even back with everyone guarding her, I love the short attendant with her, like, spear
She's
ready.
trying so hard. She's very sweet. She's very dedicated to her friend.
It's that simple comedy, the simple visual comedy. And that's what I like about the attendant is it's a visual comedy. It's not some, like, one-liner that they're trying to pawn off every few lines.
And she's genuine. Like, even though she is hired to be the equivalent of lady in waiting for Princess Kaguya, she clearly has an affection for her. She plays with her, she dotes on her, she, helps her do sneaky and naughty things sometimes. She's keeping secrets.
Yeah.
And she's ready to stand up and fight the moon.
No, exactly. And it means nothing because the moon procession comes and we got a Buddha in their presence, which, again, the fusion of religions, of this being a folk tale / the stories I read, I don't remember them saying anything about, like, the Buddha or anything. It's just...
No, but I like the addition, especially for a modern audience, because I think the interpretation of just the moon would not have been heavenly enough.
No.
For, like, a general audience to really gravitate the weight of, like, oh, when you go to the moon, it's not that you're, like, a moon people. You're not alien. You are gods. And you are not coming back down. No,
exactly. And it's... The other thing that I think is great about this scene, too, is the joyful music that's played against what's really a sad moment.
A very sad moment.
I mean, it's very much
her parents can't even stay awake to protect her.
They bring her back. They bring the parents
do.
awake. But as a last thing, too. And I mean, it's just that whole thing that sometimes you can't decide when it's going to end.
And then it's hard to have a dry eye when she gets to the part of, no, please, I'm not done here. There is happiness here. I cried out to you because there is sadness here, too.
Yes.
And they're like, you've had a full year. I think the party's over. Time to go home.
Yeah, well, and maybe that's part of why she doesn't like that first quarter, too, is because Horai is supposed to be this land of no suffering.
Yeah.
And there's that little lingering part of her that realizes that, hey, I've experienced that. I don't want any part of that world. And
I also think that while Princess Kaguya varies widely in her maturity throughout this movie, I think by this point, she has matured to the point of realizing that joy is amplified by sorrow. Mm-hmm. And trying to explain that to gods who do not see the benefit in sadness.
Yeah. Well, because the whole thing is that's the thing about the Tale of Princess Kaguya, is so much of it is about moving on. Mm-hmm. And even the gods move on regardless of the mortal's desire, because even though she is kind of a living higher entity, she is still mortal in that world, technically.
Yes. She has not left yet.
Nah, she does, though.
She does. She does leave, and there's not a dry eye in the theater.
No. Even Kaguya has a tearful look back. But here's why I think it's sad, but it's also beautiful at the same time, because even though she's lost her memory, we know she lost her memory when she came to Earth. Mm-hmm. So there's this lingering idea that the cycle will repeat itself, looking back at the Earth, of pining for the Earth, living on Earth for a year, forgetting that she's a kind of a higher being, and then pining for the moon again. Kind of like the cyclical nature of the seasons that we saw, where she was born in spring and she returned back in spring again.
Sure, it's very poetic.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the thing about the Tale of Princess Kaguya. One thing I do appreciate from what Takahata said is that he didn't intend for this to be his magnus opus. He just wrote a good movie.
And boy, was it a good movie.
Oh, man. It does make me think quite a bit, because even though everyone I've talked to who has seen The Tale of Princess Kaguya loves it.
Of course.
Even though
it's hard not to like.
Yeah, even though it doesn't follow Studio Ghibli. And I couldn't find any resources for it, but I do kind of wonder if it inspired a little bit of Yue's story from Avatar.
Yeah, I mean, there's some similarities. I do think that just the elements are all so old that, like, eventually overlap will happen. I think part of the reason, too, while his other works, especially with Ghibli, are fantastic, even the lesser known ones, this one does strike a different chord, where the Grave movie is equally sad, arguably more sad, but
downright fucking depressing.
Very, but I think this one strikes a resonance in a different way. There is a lot of thought and intrigue and self-reflection that can happen after this movie that I don't think his other works provide.
It's a much more mature... I'll argue with that a little bit. Only Yesterday, I think, is his other most mature movie.
It's sure.
Because if we look at the studio works, Grave of the Fireflies, very good, very mature for a burgeoning studio.
It is.
But this is his most mature work. And I will say, Only Yesterday, very mature in its setting. One being a movie about adults, but also it's... The Tale of the Princess Kaguya has a little bit of childness to it. Where Only Yesterday is very much so about getting away from your 9 to 5, like going and living with nature, whereas this is living with nature, but learning that the world isn't always going to work the way you want it to be. And I think that's the beauty in it, is that just going with the flow of it and appreciating what you have when you have it.
I agree. And I also think one of the interest and honestly part of the beauty of Princess Kaguya is that this is a movie that, as you age and rewatch this film, you will have a little bit different interpretations and understandings behind different characters' reactions or motivations as you age. Mm-hmm. You will connect more with either the mother character, or you will see more immature or selfish moments out of Kaguya as you get older that when you're younger you might miss over the glamour of the moon or the sadness of being caged in a gilded palace.
The fun little side maid who's always there for her.
Sure. And I think while everyone will get a similar end result out of the movie, I think the weight and the impact of the storytelling will change per person and per time you watch it even. And I think having a movie like that is significantly more impressive to create than I think a lot of the other Ghibli films, which are fun, but usually miss that evolution with the audience.
Mm-hmm. That level of I don't want to say they're made for kids, because that's the thing with Ghibli films is, apart from like maybe Ponyo.
Ponyo's definitely for children.
Yeah, most of the movies feel that happy middle ground where you could watch it as a kid. Maybe Only Yesterday might be boring for a kid, but
sure,
it's that set where it's that happy medium where
just about anybody could watch it.
Yeah, the best age, well, even My Neighbor Totoro, the best way to discover this level of Ghibli films, you might fall in love with those other movies as children, but once you rewatch them as teenagers and adults, Spirited Away is going to have a different feel to it. The Wind Rises is definitely more for adults. Tales from Earthsea is more mature, but like Castle in the Sky, there's that level of in-betweenness that I think Kaguya masterfully does compared to any of the other Studio Ghibli movies.
I completely agree. I think that's what really sets it apart. And I know it's not a lot of people's top 5, but I would argue it should be.
Oh, Tale of Princess Kaguya is probably top 3. Without looking at 100% the Studio Ghibli list, this is definitely, it's hard to
I know it's
put
hard
it
to
over Spirited Away, but
I understand. But I think a lot of people do overlook this one for both the art style and also when it came out was kind of an awkward time period for a lot of people to like pick up either Ghibli itself or specifically this movie. A lot of us were trying to catch up on other stuff that they had produced and that we were just now getting our hands on.
Still trying to get caught up. There's I think 3 I haven't seen.
Yeah, there's a lot especially if you didn't know about them because they were a little harder to get back in the day.
Yeah, The Red Turtle and When Marnie Was Here.
Eventually. Get those eventually.
But I don't know. It's just such a different work from the rest of the studio stuff. Even My Neighbor the Yamadas, I rewatched that I think earlier this year, and it definitely has a different feel. I appreciate it more the second time I watched it.
I agree.
But Kaguya is one of those ones where I appreciated it from the get-go, and I probably would have liked it as a young adult too, of just the art style.
Oh, same. I think this is one of the few ones that rewatching it every year would feel worth it, not just enjoyable. Not something I want to do, but truly worth it as far as getting something out of this story. Yeah,
it's like Eraserhead for me, where I watch it ever so often and it hits a little bit differently.
I agree. I also think that it stands out beautifully art style wise. It is done in similar watercolor style that the rest of Ghibli is well known for, but it leans so much heavier into stylization, into the effort put into each character design throughout the entire film as the evolution happens. I think that really helps stand this work apart.
Oh yeah, 100%. So Chris, good, bad, weird rating. What do you give Kaguya?
This for me can only be good. There is nothing else about it. There is no bad. I honestly looked trying very critically because while I do have a soft spot for Ghibli, I have been trying to be more critical with their works recently as far as taking off the nostalgia goggles. Kaguya still holds strong for me. There's nothing bad. There's nothing weird. It is simply a perfectly good movie.
No, I completely agree with that. I am disappointed myself for not picking it up earlier, but it is definitely one of those ones where, as good as the rest of Studio Ghibli is, and Spirited Away is always going to have a special spot for me, this is one that I think is going to stand the test of time more so than any of the other ones.
I completely agree.
So do you recommend The Tale of the Princess Kaguya?
Oh, heavily. I know this is one that a lot of people have skipped for other different Ghibli films. This is one that must be on your list. And if you have seen it, and you haven't seen it recently, you must rewatch it. I promise you will have a different outtake than the first time you watched it.
No, I 100% recommend it, and I would have made my parents watch it if you weren't borrowing the copy.
Oops.
No, it's all good. But yeah, it's one that I'm definitely going to make people watch. I mean, it's to a certain point once tiny humans are older, this is one I think they would potentially be interested in.
I agree.
Gotta step in, and they like Totoro, so
Get them started early.
Yes, so, but it's that time of the show. Season 6 bingo. New season and new game. Chris and I play bingo, and you can too. Rules for the players are simple. 1 stamp per card per episode. Cards can be found on our socials at TGTBTW_podcast on Instagram and Threads, or TGTBTW podcast on Twitter. You can also feel free to email or send the request to our email, at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. You can use any of the 3 bingo card variations, but each stamp must be associated with the Season 6 episode. First place is already taken, so second place gets to choose a deep dive in a microview. Third place gets 2 microviews, and fourth and fifth each get a single microview. So feel free to share at us on social media or email us for participation. Rules are slightly different for Chris and myself. We get a total of 2 stamps per deep dive. First to get a bingo in any of the good, bad, or weird categories gets to choose a movie they feel fits that category for Season 7. Chris, what do you choose?
Off my weird card, I will be taking Nicho Shoehorns in Takashi Miike once again.
I did not shoehorn in it. It made sense talking about the era.
He has placed him once again in our episode. Even a movie that he shouldn't be in, but that's okay.
Takashi Miike is good anywhere.
This is true. And then off my good card, I will be picking the Charlie Interruption mode.
Thank you. I am going to go opposite of you. In good, Nicho shoehorns Takashi Miike in where it works. Or where it makes sense.
Very well.
Promote our old episodes, thank you very much. On my bad card, because I can't think of anything weird, pointless romance.
I will agree with you there.
Between Kaguya and the boy at the end there.
Because while I think it is sweet, it does not go anywhere. Except for the moon.
Yeah, I'll capture the moon for you.
She goes, I love you, and he goes, oh, me too, and she goes, okay, bye.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, man, that sucks. He was, like, ready to, like, ditch his wife and his kid and run away with her, and she's like, I can't, I actually have to go to the moon this afternoon, where I will be forgetting all about you, bye-bye.
It feels like such a catty teenager.
It does! It was such an ass move. His poor heart ruined.
Yeah. But I am looking forward to more of pre-gaming Folktober. Our next episode is going to be a spotlight with a guest on. That's kind of folky. I'm excited for it. Returning guest, so look forward to that.
It will be good.
And then our next next pre-game deep dive is going to be a little bit different from a fully traditional yokai or folklore story, but it's going to be related, so.
I trust you on that.
More weeb shit.
Of course, what else?
But, anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace! Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace!